What happens when a society loses its moral compass? Just look around. Something is breaking, not slowly, not quietly. You can see it in the numbers if you're willing to look. In the United States, deaths from despair, suicide, overdose, alcoholism have risen every single year for 2 decades. Loneliness has been declared a public health epidemic by the U.S. Surgeon General. 1 in 4 Americans has no close friends. Antidepressant use has increased over 3,000% since 1990. Anxiety disorders now affect more than 300 million people globally. This didn't happen overnight. These numbers didn't spike because of one election or one generation's failure. And nobody wants to talk about why. Because the answer points not to a virus, not to a political party, not to an economic policy, but to something much deeper. Something a civilization quietly removed from its foundations over the last century. And now the building is cracking. In 1,000 quiet ways, one family, one community, one soul at a time. For most of recorded human history, nearly every civilization organized itself around a shared moral framework, values and beliefs that came from something beyond the individual. In the West, that framework was Christianity. It shaped laws, schools, art, family structure, and the very concept of human dignity. Whether you believed personally or not, you lived inside a world it built. Then came the Enlightenment, then industrialization, then the 20th century, with its wars, its science, its unprecedented wealth and its unprecedented disillusionment. And slowly, deliberately, institution by institution, God was removed from the public square, from schools, from courts, from the language of politics, from the center of family life. It wasn't done violently. It was done gradually, with the best of intentions. Secularization was presented as progress, the natural evolution of a civilization mature enough to govern itself without superstition. Religion became private, a personal choice, something you kept to yourself. The experiment had begun, and like most experiments, nobody fully understood what was being tested until the results arrived. What happens to a society that removes its moral foundation? Not immediately. A building doesn't collapse the moment you remove a load-bearing wall. It stands, held up by momentum and memory. But the cracks appear, and they grow. Look at what the data actually shows, the raw, uncomfortable numbers. In 1960, fewer than 10% of American children were born outside of marriage. By 2023, that number exceeded 40%. The collapse of the family unit, which every major religion recognized as the foundational cell of civilization, has been one of the most dramatic social transformations of the modern era. Studies consistently show that children raised outside stable 2-parent households face significantly higher rates of poverty, educational failure, and mental illness. Church attendance in the United States dropped from over 70% in the 1950s to below 20% today. Countries that were the heartland of Christendom for 1,000 years, France, Germany, the Netherlands, now report majority irreligious populations. The speed of this shift is historically unprecedented. And what replaced it? That is the question nobody can answer cleanly. Consumerism stepped in. The market offered identity through products, meaning through achievement. But things do not satisfy the human hunger for transcendence. You cannot buy your way out of existential emptiness. Despite living in the wealthiest civilization in history, people in secular Western nations report some of the lowest levels of life satisfaction and sense of purpose ever recorded. Then came social media, likes instead of love, followers instead of friends, validation from strangers instead of meaning from real relationships. Teen depression has more than doubled since 2010. The suicide rate among adolescent girls has tripled. These are not statistics. These are children. Here is what most secular analysts miss about Christianity. It was never just about theology. It was infrastructure. The local church was a community center, a crisis support system, a place where the lonely found belonging and the grieving found comfort. It created what sociologists call social capital, the invisible web of trust and shared obligation that holds communities together. Remove it without replacing it with something of equal depth, and you don't get freedom. you get fragmentation. C.S. Lewis wrote that there is a God-shaped hole in every human heart. You can reject that theologically, but the evidence suggests he was describing something real. Human beings appear incapable of living without transcendence, without something larger than themselves to belong to and orient their lives around. When God is removed, something else fills that space. History shows the replacements are rarely benign. Nationalism, ideology, tribal politics. The 20th century's most catastrophic movements, Nazism, Stalinism, Maoism, were secular ideologies that filled the void with the state or the race. The results were the most murderous chapters in human history. This is not an argument that religion prevents all evil. The Church has its own history of failure and corruption. No honest case for Christianity ignores that. But the question is not whether religion is perfect. It is, what happens when you remove it and replace it with nothing? We are living inside the answer, and most people are too distracted to look at it directly. The most painful part is not the statistics, it is the faces behind them. The young man without a father, a faith, or a community, who found belonging in a radicalized online group because it was the first place that made him feel he mattered. The woman in her 30s who has everything the secular world promised and wakes up at 3 a.m. with a terror she cannot name. These are not individual failures. They are predictable consequences of a civilization that dismantled its moral infrastructure and called it liberation. So here is the question this video cannot answer for you, but that you must answer for yourself. Can a society survive without a transcendent moral foundation? Can human beings find lasting purpose and moral clarity through reason alone? Is there something about what we are that requires something beyond the material to make life fully livable? The secular experiment has been running for roughly a century in the West. The results are in. They are not what the architects of that experiment promised. The world didn't just lose God. It lost the language of meaning, the architecture of community, and the courage to say that some things are true, not because we chose them, but because they are written into the nature of what we are. And until we reckon honestly with what was lost, we will keep treating the symptoms while the foundation continues to crumble. Every generation believes it will be the first to build lasting meaning from nothing. History disagrees. So tell me, what do you think fills the void? What has your generation replaced faith with? Let me know in the comments, because this conversation is one the world is desperate to have, and almost nobody is willing to start it.